In today's class, I'm going to start with a new chapter, that is chapter number 19, Java exceptions. In the last class, we have finished with chapter number 18. What are the various Java streams? What are the various input-output operations that we perform in the Java programming? Now, next is chapter number 19, Java exceptions. What are the Java exceptions, or what are the how to deal with the Java exception? That may be a try block, that may be a catch block, that may be a throw block. How to deal with? So an exception is a problem that arises during the execution of a program. So whenever a program is executing, whenever a program is executing, a problem arises. For example, if I'm declaring the array as a 5, and if I'm trying to access a 6 value, that is one of the exceptions. So it is a problem that arises during the execution of a program. An exception can occur for many different reasons. What are the various reasons by which we can face the problems? The first one is a user had entered the invalid data. So it depends on the data, or it depends on the input that is given by the user. The same example, for example, I'm declaring the array as a 50 and I'm going to access the array, or I'm going to access the index element that is 51. So it is the invalid data that is given by the user. Then file that needs to be opened could not be found. That means we have opened the file.input output or file.open, and that cannot be opened and cannot be found in the program. Then there is a network connection that has been lost in the middle of the communication, or the JVM machine has been run out of the memory. So the JVM machine has been stopped working sudden, or we can say the JVM machine has run out of memory, or there is a network connection that has been lost in the middle of the communication. This is one of the exceptions. This is one of the category of the exceptions in the Java. So that may be a user input, that may be a file cannot be opened, cannot be found, and that can be a network connection that is found in over here or lost in the middle of the communication. Some of these exceptions are caused by the user error. So some of the exceptions or these exceptions are made by, or we can say that generally exceptions are made by the or caused by the user error, other by the program errors or programmer error, other by the physical resources that have failed in some manner. So it depends on the error to error. So most of the error is coming from the user, then programmer error, then other by the physical resources that have been failed. That may be a network connection, that may be any type of error that is a physical resource. So to understand how exception handling works in the Java, we need to understand the three categories of the exception. What are the three categories of exception? One is a checked exception, then there is a runtime exception, then there is errors. Now, what is the meaning of the checked exception? So it is an exception that is typically a user error or a problem that cannot be foreseen by the programmers, that cannot be rectified by the programmer. This is the error that is typically a user error or a problem. For example, if a file is to be opened, but the file cannot be found. So a file is opened, that means we are going to open the file in the program, but the file is not available in the memory. So how is that open? So if the file is opened, but the file could not be found, an exception occurs. And these exceptions cannot simply be ignored at the time of compilation. So we cannot simply ignore the exception at the time of the compilation. No. But these exceptions cannot be simply be ignored at the time of compilation. The next one is runtime exception. So this is an exception that occurs most probably that have been avoided by the programmers, as opposed to the checked exceptions. Runtime exceptions are ignored at the time of compilation. So these are ignored at the time of compilation, but checked exceptions are not ignored at the time of compilation. Next one is errors. So these are not the exceptions, but they are the problems that arises beyond the control of the user. So there is no control of the user, there is no control of the programmer in the errors or on the errors, and errors are typically ignored in your code because they rarely do anything about an error. For example, if a stack overflow. Now remember about the stack and the queue. So if the stack overflows, an error will arise, and they are also ignored at the time of compilation. That is an error. So there are three types of exceptions. One is a checked, one is a runtime, one is an error. Next one is exception hierarchy. What is exception hierarchy? That is what is the main category of the exception. Then next one, that is the exception hierarchy. So there are three categories of this exception in the Java that can be handled by the Java. One is a checked exception, then there is a runtime. Now, what is the main difference between the checked exception and the runtime exception is that checked exception cannot be ignored, or that cannot be simply be ignored at the time of the compilation, but runtime exception can be ignored. It can be, not always, it can be ignored sometime at the time of compilation. then errors that are not ignored, or these are not the exceptions, but problem arises beyond the control of the user or the programmer. And errors are typically ignored in your code because you are really do anything about an error. There is no usage, there is no, we can say, any solution of the error. These are not the exceptions, these are the errors. Now, what are the various hierarchies, or what are the various categories of the exceptions that are divided of the language of the subtype java.lang exception class? This is one of the class, this is one of the header file that is included for the Java exceptions, that is java.lang.exception class. And the exception class is a subclass of the throwable class. So whenever we throw anything, whenever we use a try block, throw block, that can be accepted, that is a subclass of the throw class. And other than the exception class, there is another subclass known as the error, which is derived from the creator class. So whenever we use a throw class, whenever we use a throw error, or when the exception is used, so that is, there is another subclass that is known as error, which is derived from the throw class. And errors are not normally trapped from the Java program. This condition normally happens in case of the failures. That may be a several failures, means some major failures that cannot be handled by the Java program. So these errors are not handled by the Java program, but they can be used by the Java internally. And errors are generated to indicate error that is generated by the runtime environment. For example, JVM is out of memory. That means we are installing the JVM that is out of the memory for this one. So the JVM is out of memory, and only the programs cannot recover from the errors. Now, exception is divided into two classes, or we can say the exception class is divided into two subclasses. One is the input-output exception class, one is the runtime exception class. Now, these are the categories of the various exceptions. One is the input-output exception class, one is the runtime exception class. So first one is throwable class, then there is an error, then exception, then input-output exception, then runtime exceptions. These are the few categories of the Java built-in exceptions. That is a list of the most common checked and the unchecked Java built-in exceptions. One is the throwable class, then there is error. After the error, there is the exception. So whenever we throw the content, whenever we throw any exceptions, that becomes either the error or the exceptions. Now again, it is divided into two parts. One is the input-output exception. That means exception is available in the input or the output. Whenever we give the input, there is the exception. Whenever we take the output, there is the exception. And next one is runtime exception. So whenever we deal with someone, whenever we are doing something, so there is an exception that is known as a runtime exception. So these are divided into three categories. One is error, one is the exception, then there is input-output or the runtime exceptions. Now, what are the various Java built-in exceptions? So Java has several exception classes inside the standard package that is known as the java.lang. So that is available in the standard package that is known as, or this is known as a java.language, java.lang. The most general of these exceptions are the subclasses of the standard type runtime exception. So these are the subclasses of the standard type. What is the standard type? What is the subclass of the standard type? That is the runtime exception. And since java.lang is implicitly imported into all Java programs, so most exceptions derived from runtime exceptions are automatically available. So most we can say the exceptions that is available in the runtime are automatically available in the input-output exception of the runtime exceptions. And Java defines multiple other types of exceptions also that is related to the various class libraries. Now these are the various lists of the unchecked runtime exceptions. What are the various list of the unchecked runtime exceptions? First is the arithmetic exceptions. That is the arithmetic error such as a divide by the zero. Then the array index that is out of the bounds. Then array store exception that is to an array element of an incompatible type. Then invalid cast, the illegal argument used to invoke a message, that is illegal argument exception. So whenever we give the argument, that may be illegal. We are not using the semicolon, we are not using the initialization part, anything. That is the illegal argument that is used to invoke a method. The illegal monitor state exception, and then illegal state exception. So one is the illegal argument, one is the illegal monitor state, one is the illegal state. Then illegal thread state, then index out of bounds exceptions, then negative array size exception, that is array created with the negative size, then null pointer exception, that is invalid use of the null reference. So there is no use of the null reference, that is the invalid use of the null reference. The number format exceptions, this is used with the invalid conversion of a string to a numeric. Then security exception, there is an attempt to violate the security. The string index out of bound. That means attempt to index outside the bound of a string, outside the limit of the string. We are going to access a string out of the limit, out of the array. That is attempt to index outside the bound of a string. The next one is unsupported operation exception. So there is no supported operation exception. There is an unsupported operation was encountered during the program, during the running of the program, during the runtime or the compile time program. That is known as the unsupported operation was encountered. The next one is following is the list of the Java checked exceptions defined in the java.lang. So this is the java.lang that is available with the defined exception that is defined with the Java checked exceptions. So first one is exception, then there is a description. In the exception, there is class not found exception, the first one. In this, there is a description that is a class not found. Then clone not supported exception. So this is an attempt to clone an object that does not implement the clonable interface. Then illegal access exception, then access to a class is denied. So whatever the access to a class that is denied over here, that is known as illegal access exception. The next is interrupted exception. That means if any interrupt is occurred during the thread, during the program execution or the running or the compile time, that is known as the, or that is represented by the interrupted exception. Next one, if I'm going to access the method or the function that is not available in the program, again there is exception that occurred in the, or that arises in the program, that is known as no such method exceptions. Now, what are the various methods, or these are the various list of the important methods that is available in the throw class in the Java exceptions. First one is public string get message. So this returns a detailed message about the exception that has occurred. So this returns a detail, or this gives a detailed message. We can say the overall compilation method or message that is initialized in the throw constructors. The next one is public throw get code message, the function, then public string to string function, then public void print stack tree function. There's a stack tree function of this one, or trace function of this one to trace the things for the Java or for the exception methods. Next one is how to cache the exceptions, or what are the various categories to cache the, or how we can cache the various methods by caching the exceptions. So a method caches an exceptions using a combination of the try and the catch keyword. So there is a try and the catch keyword that is used to represent the catching exceptions. So a try or the catch block is placed around the code that might generate an exception, and code within the try or the catch block is referred to as protected code. And the syntax for the try and the block or the catch block is the syntax for the try and the catch block is try, then there is a curly braces start, then there is a protected code. After the protected code, there is a closing braces closed. Then after the coding, there is a catch. That means whenever you use the try block, there is a side-by-side catch block also. Catch exception name even. Then again there is a opening curly braces. Then catch block means whatever the statements we give in the catch block that is represented within the curly braces, and at last the curly brace will be closed. This is one of the examples that shows how the try and the catch block works. So this statement declares a type of exceptions that are used to trying to catch the blocks, and if the exception occurs in the protected code, then the catch block or the try block is checked out. And if the type of exception that occurred is listed in a catch block, so this will pass to the catch block, mix the argument in the method parameters. Now, following is an array that is declared with the two elements. Then the code tries to access the third element of the array, which throws an exception. So two elements that is going to cover or access the third element. So first one is file name except test.java. Now it is using the same concept, import java.input output. That means importing the java.input output means importing all the input operations and the output operations that is available in the Java. That is import java.input output operations. Then public class except test. So one of the class name is except test. Then there is a public static void main string args. We are using the same as a void main function. Public static void main string args. Then there is a try block. Within the try block, there is a statement. There is a initialization. Initialization is int a array. That means a is the array type that stores a value of integer, and this stores two values, that is 0 and 1. Then for printing purpose, this program is going to access the third. The same example as we give, or as I give you in the starting phase, or at the starting phase, that is, if I'm declaring the variable as a 2, I'm going to access the array element as a 3. So how is that possible? Because there are total 2 elements in this. So how is it possible to catch out or trace out the third element? So this is the one of the exceptions, or we can say one of the best example of the exceptions. Then after the exception, after the try block exception, there is a catch block, that is array index out of the bound exceptions e system.out.println exception thrown. So exception thrown is exception thrown plus e system.out.println out of the block. So that is our next one is out of the block. That is beyond the boundary, beyond the block, out of the block. Now, this is exception thrown. Java.language.array index out of bound exception 3 out of the block. Next one is multiple catch blocks. One is multiple catch blocks. So in a set program, we are using the multiple catch blocks. Not the one catch block, there are multiple catch blocks. And there is only one try block. One try block, multiple catch blocks. So this is the syntax that looks like the following. There's only one try block, and within this one, there's a predicate code catch exception type 1 E1, then catch block exception type 2 E2, and catch block catch exception type 3. Then there is a catch block for this. And the previous statement demonstrates 3 catch blocks that you can make for any one of them through a single try. That means there is only one try, but there are multiple catch blocks in this one. And if an exception occurs in the protected code, the exception is thrown to the first catch block in the list, and if the data type of the exception source matches the exception type 1, it gets the code there. If it is not available, then the exception passes down to the second catch string. This continues until the exception either in the catch block or the code or the host, all the catches, in which the case the current method stops execution and the exception is thrown down to the previous method only. This is one of the examples that shows how to use the multiple try and the multiple catch statement. There is only one try. Then this is used as a file equals to new file input stream file name. So new name or new of the file or one of the file name is available with the input stream. Then there is a file name that is used with the new keyword. The next equals to byte file.read. This is reading the file or read the file take the file in the read mode, and that will combine into the byte that is stored in the x variable. Now this next step is to print the x. When you use the catch input output expression I.print stack trace return -1, then there is a catch block for the print stack trace. Next one is throw or the throws keyword. So how to use the throw block, or how to deal with the throw or the throws keyword. If a method does not include a check exception, the method must declare it using the throw keyword, and this appears at the end of the method signature. So whenever it is the end of the signature, it is available at the end of the method signature, that is try or the throw or the throws keyword. And you can also throw as an exception either a newly installed, we can say the exception, or an exception that you can just code by using the throw keyword. And try to understand in different throws or the throw and the catch block, that is how to use the different throw or the throws keywords. This is a method, this is an example that shows how to throw the remote exception. So first one is import java.input-output, then public class name. So there is a public class and there is a class name for this one. Public void deposit double amount throws remote exception. So there is a public void deposit, name of the function is deposit, and the argument in this parameter in this use is a double amount. So this is the amount is a variable of the double type, then throws remote exception. After this, there is a method implementation. Now what is a method implementation? This is throw new remote exception. So take out the throw as a new remote exception, then remainder of the class definition. So a method can declare that it throws more than one exception at the same time, in which case the exceptions are declared in the list separated by the comma. So whatever the list that is separated by the comma that is available in the exception, in which exceptions are declared in the list. For example, the following method declares that it throws a remote exception and insufficient funds exception. So there is an insufficient fund exception as well as a remote exception. Import java.input_output file, public class name, then public void withdraw double amount, source remote exception, then insufficient fund exception for this one. There is an insufficient fund exception in the remote exception in the double amount throws exception. Then next one is method implementation. Whatever the method implement that may be used by the try block, catch block, or the exception type, then remainder of the class definition. Next one is when to use a final keyword or finally keyword. Not the final, it is a finally keyword. This is used to create a block of the code that allows or that follows a try block. So there is a try block that follows the try block that is followed by the finally keyword. And finally block of the code always executes the code, always executes whether or not an exception has occurred. So if there is no exception occurred, then also the block of the code executes. That is the finally block of code, whether or not an exception has occurred. Usually, a finally block allows you to run any cleanup statement that you execute, no matter what happened in the protected code. So no matter what is the protected code, how it deals, how it works in the protected code. So a finally block appears at the end of the cache blocks and has the following syntax. Is the syntax of the finally block or finally appears at the end of the cache block. Now, there's one try block in this. There's a protected code for the cache. Then there is a catch after the closing of the try block, catch exception type 1 E1, then catch block, catch exception type 2 E2, then catch block, catch exception type 3 E3. Then at last there is a finally block. That means there is an end of the cache blocks, but there is only one try block. So after these three cache blocks, there is the end of the cache block. So that is represented by the finally keyword. So this finally block always executes at the end of the line, at the end of the curly braces. This is the public class accept test, then public static void main string args. So int a, that is array variable, equals to new int 2. Again, it is taking as the two variables of the integers, two integer types that is stored in the new or that is stored in the array a. Then try system.out.println access element 3. So there is an access element 3 for the system.out.println, then plus a3. Then there is a try or catch block. So try is over. Try means access element of the third one. That is not possible because we are declaring the array in a two variable in a two type. Java programming. Now, how to declare your own exceptions in the Java programming? So you can create your own exception in the java.key, and these are the following points that is kept in mind by writing your own exception classes. First one is each and every exception must be a child of the store class, and if you want to write a checked exception that is automatically enforced by the handler class or the handler class, you need to expect or you need to expect exception class. Next one is if you want to write a runtime exception, you need to extend the runtime exception class also. This is the class that is a runtime exception class. So runtime or the class exception, then next trends exception. So this is the example that shows how to use the insufficient method.java or insufficient methods or funds in the exception class. So import java.input output public class insufficient funds exception extends exception, then private double amount public insufficient funds exception double amount this dot amount equals to amount, then public double get amount. This is using the get amount as a double, that is of the public type, and return the amount. So to demonstrate using our user-defined exception, the following checking account class contains a virtual method that throws an insufficient fund exception. This is used for checking the account. So for private double balance, then private int number, and public checking account int number. This dot number equals to number. So number is stored in the this dot number. Then public void equals to double amount. So balance plus equals to amount. So this is as a balance plus equals to amount means whatever the amount method that is used to the balance. So first of all, if the balance has a zero, that will be incremented by the amount. And in the next part, the balance has contained the balance plus amount. In the next part, again it is incremented with the amount. Next one is what are the various common exceptions that is used in the Java. So in the Java, it is possible to define two categories of exceptions in the errors. One is the JVM. So it depends on the JVM machines, Java virtual machines exceptions. So these are the exceptions or the errors that are used or logically thrown by the JVMs. And examples are null pointer exceptions, array index out of bound exceptions, and the class card exceptions. So it depends on the Java virtual machines, which version we are using, how it is installed, and if it is if everything is okay, then also there is a JVM exception that is available that are used or thrown by the JVMs, and these are the three examples of these JVMs exceptions. One is the null pointer exceptions, next one is array index out of bound exceptions, next one is class cast exception, next one is programmatic exceptions. So other than the JVM, if there is any exception in the program, so these exceptions are thrown by the application or the API of the programmer